Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. Now, you would think Nigel Farage is delighted with current political polling, wouldn't you? Indeed, he's been saying as much. But there's one poll out this week which is not going to be happy reading for him and goes some way towards explaining why he's so desperate to get as much momentum going this year, because he's going to lose a lot of it later this Parliament. And much of it is because he is a limiting factor on reform breaking through to the big time. But first, for daily political commentary, please hit the subscribe button to stay notified. So Nigel Farage is delighting in the latest voting intention polls, but as polling analysts point out, it's a consequence of people having had enough of the Conservatives and not seeing the change with Labour, so going for the third option. The third option, thanks to a lot of uncritical promotion in the mainstream media and social media, being Reform UK rather than, say, the Lib Dems. But another poll out shows just how much of a limiting factor Nigel Farage is for Reform UK. See, there's no doubt he's given his party a boost. And although we can't be certain, I think it's very likely that Reform's polling right now would not be as good if Farage had remained on the sidelines, had he not stood for Parliament, and had the whole show still been run by Richard Tice. But as I've said before, Nigel Farage is what Neil Kinnock described as a Marmite personality. As with any populist leader, yes, there are those who like him often love him, right? Absolutely. They trust him with their firstborn. And then when he sold it for a crate of beer, they wouldn't blame Farage for that. It'd be someone else's fault. But most people don't just disapprove of him. They really don't like him. He's an incredibly divisive figure, which is why the latest polling on political leaders is probably as it is. So YouGov carried out some polling. It was really on how people perceived Kemi Badenoch after her first 100 days, well, pretending to be leader, because we now know that she only actually became leader this month. But as part of this polling, they matched leaders head to head. Now, this is always interesting because although we have parliamentary elections, a lot of swing voters are making a decision not about their local MP, but about the party they want in government. And a big part of that decision is who they want to be Prime Minister. So very often for a lot of people, the vote is about who they think would be the best head of government. So for some key voters, the general election is treated more like a presidential election, really. Now, there are a few points of interest in the polls. One is that Keir Starmer beats Badenoch, Davey and Farage. So right now, despite Labour pushing their most unpopular lines, some of them because they had to do it and this is the best time to do it. You do it early on the cycle, it makes sense. Some of it, as I've already spoken at length about, is unnecessarily. But nonetheless, this may be the point of peak unpopularity for him. Now, it could get technically a little bit worse later this year if they don't switch to more positive messaging. But as their legislation gets passed into law as the year goes on, they will have more material to tell a positive story about. It is then up to them to use it. Also, assuming the economic outlook in March isn't much worse than it was last autumn, and it's all up and down at the moment, but if Reeves can get away without having to scale back some of her spending plans in the final budget statement before the budget itself goes live, then Labour may have finished making policy announcements that are unpopular with at least key voters. They still seem intent on making them for like other voters. But at this point of intense unpopularity, where, you know, a charismatic leader might have been able to ride it out a better, and where Labour are still getting to grips with how government works, because remember, these people haven't been in government. Most of them haven't been in government ever. Some of them, it's like 15 years, you know, and they're making communication cock-ups as well. You know, Starmer, even despite all this, is still considered a more credible Prime Minister than all the alternatives, Farage included. But that's the polling from Starmer's point of view. What about Nigel Farage? Well, he doesn't beat any of them, even Badenoch. They're tied. I mean, let's be honest. Kemi Badenoch is making a right arse of this leadership gig, right? I'm now seeing reports that Tory MPs have told her she's got a year to turn things around. Now, the media being as they are, I don't know if it's many MPs saying that or if it's particularly influential MPs. It might just be Mark Francois, who knows? But it's certainly the case that Badenoch is doing badly, and yet Farage still can't even beat her as most credible Prime Minister. And let's look at some details. See, there's no surprise that more Conservatives think Badenoch would be the better Prime Minister of the two. You know, that's just your sort of tribal thinking. But the same applies to Labour and Lib Dem voters as well. Only 9% of Labour voters from last year think Farage would clearly be the better choice between Farage and Badenoch. That's disastrous for Farage, because just as Starmer and Labour are going to be at their least popular at some point this year, might even be now, before the change starts appearing on the statute books and public spending, so too is Farage at his most popular, arguably. The media are still not regularly putting him under scrutiny, but I'm seeing signs that there's a bit more of that. He's riding the wave of Trump's new presidency, but what happens if Trump starts doing things that are wildly unpopular in the UK? He's getting plenty of promotion on social media. Some of it is coming from the owners of those media platforms. But as I've said recently, Farage himself does a way better job on social media than his opponents. Voters are flocking to a third option because people don't have confidence in either Conservatives or Labour. And Reform UK are netting much of that loss of support from the main two. Some of it's going elsewhere, but most of it seems to be going to Reform UK. And yet Farage himself is still not considered a viable Prime Minister, even when ranged against a Tory leader who says sandwiches and racism aren't real, and a Labour leader who seems to have a bet with someone as to how low his popularity can get. It would not be quite right to describe Nigel Farage as a drag factor on Reform UK without adding to that statement. He is the sharpest operator Reform UK have, and perhaps the only one capable of cult-like support from the core. He has certainly gotten them to the point where they can push for wider appeal. However, in pursuit of that wider appeal, he is a drag factor. He's not well liked. Keir Starmer beats Farage more comfortably than any other leader. He's the only one of the other three leaders on double-digit shares of the vote last year who can't beat Badenoch in a head-to-head. But the Conservatives can and will change their leader. It is possible they'll think a bit more carefully about their choice next time. It is also possible they select someone even worse, like they did after, Johnson and Sunak stepped down, I guess. But Reform UK are stuck with Farage. Stuck in a few ways, I suppose. First, he owns the party, so he can't be compelled to step down. But, he could agree. If there was someone else who would clearly do better, he could agree to step down. But is there anyone better? Richard Tice might be more palatable to that broader range of voters, but he'd fall backwards amongst the core support, wouldn't he? Plus, how's he going to do that when he's splitting his time between living here and living as an immigrant in Dubai? Especially as he's also been even more vocally opposed to the Tommy Robinson posse than Farage. I mean, who else would they got? The woman beater, the troglodyte? I mean, Rupert Lowe would be the only credible choice, but would he be definitely better? Assuming Trump doesn't completely collapse the global economy, which I know is a big if, Labour's plans will deliver on the two things that are the most important to people, cost of living and the NHS. Once Labour can start talking about the progress made there, they will hopefully stop pushing their cringe lines of late and support will go back to them. It's clear that Nigel Farage is a repellent factor to most types of voter. All Labour need to do is point to tangible improvements, because that's, again, what is clear from polling at the moment. People are going, Tories messed it up. Oh, Labour, oh yeah, they said change. Yeah, we're not seeing any change. So they go for a third option. Once they do see that change, and Reform will start being squeezed back into their box. And when it comes to the next election, where people start to think more about the leader, and confidence in that leader is so important amongst those voters who swing elections. If Starmer is beating all challengers right now, as surprising as that might be for some people, when he'd struggle to win a personality contest with a hat stand, what are people going to be thinking when the technocrat has actually delivered much of what he promised? Farage has obviously been able to take Reform UK quite far, but to go much further, like his divisive nature and toxic history, is a barrier to major progress for the party at the next election. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, please click the like button and subscribe for further content. If you'd like to support the channel further, you can click the join button for memberships. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.